Just want to say welcome, everyone, to today's conversation. We're going to talk about some operational leadership challenges. First, a brief introduction of myself. My name is David Drickhammer. I'm an independent business writer. I've worked on a lot of assignments in the operations management improvements space, starting with Industry Week mine today. Joining us today is Bill Remy, and Angela, do you want to flip to the next slide? Bill is Chairman and CEO of QBM Consulting Group. He has over 25 years of experience in a wide variety of management roles in manufacturing companies, including aerospace and defense, railway, industrial and agricultural equipment, and process automation. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Thanks.
Also joining us is Ken Penniman. Ken is Vice President at QBM. He has worked in a variety of leadership and client engagement roles. And before joining the firm, Ken was Director Delta at American Greetings, where he led the organization's internal strategy consulting team. Welcome, Ken.
Good afternoon.
So just a quick reminder to everyone, please submit questions anytime using the Q&A box at in the lower right of your screen. And we'll either respond as we're talking or at the end of our conversation. So today, why are we talking about operational leadership challenge? What is the challenge? To answer that question really starts with the results. In many companies, forward momentum and productivity improvement rates have slowed down, and the process changes that are being made aren't being sustained. And separately, there's a lot of conversation these days around creating improvement-oriented business cultures, building organizational capabilities, and moving away from a hierarchical management style and toward more of a coaching style. But what's missing in many of these conversations is a broad understanding of the business context and objectives and how to actually make that organization transition. So today, we're going to provide some context, connect some of the dots, and hopefully provide some direction that will help operational leaders adapt more successfully in the current environment. And more specifically, Bill and Ken are going to talk about what has changed in the global context over the past 25 years, some of the operational gaps, and finally, some of the leadership tactics for addressing these challenges, as you can see on this slide. So let's get started. Bill, do you want to talk a little bit about what has changed externally over the past 25 years in operational leadership?
Sure. Thanks, David. I think if you think about over the last 25 years, a couple different big things for me that have changed are, the business environment in which we all have to operate that is so speed-driven, so customer-centric today than it used to be, where the demands for more features, more options, faster, shorter lead times is a big imperative, along with the workforce and the needs of the workforce and what it takes to execute inside the business. What leaders face today is a workforce that is a mix of an aging workforce in some industries and a very new workforce in others, and a very broad base of needs that requires leaders to be more agile in terms of their style, how they engage the team, and there's a much higher need for enrollment and engagement of people today than I think there used to be 20, 25 years ago when earlier in my career.
By enrollment engagement, you mean it's less manual work, really?
Well, no, less autocratic than it was today. Much more collaborative, much more seeking input from multiple people, building consensus in the team and the organization to align on actions than there used to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ken, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I think I would add in addition to those, the fact that, we now live in a global economy, and most of our organizations have some type of global relationships that require us to understand different cultures, and how to operate within those cultures. So, you know, in addition to being able to deal with the speed and the complexity of business now, you know, leaders need to be multicultural, multi-generational, as Bill was explaining, being able to manage different levels of generations or different generations in their organizations, and the work style and interaction styles that these individuals like. And then they need to be technology savvy. If you look at the last 25 years, what has evolved from a technology standpoint and how it influences the way that people collaborate and interact with their teams has dramatically changed, even so in the last 10 years than it in plus the last 25.
Mm-hmm. So within that context, can you talk a little bit about what are some of the symptoms and indicators of some of the challenges that operational leaders are facing? Does that make sense in terms of what the what are some of the signs that operational leadership isn't succeeding, I guess?
Well, you know, I think from one perspective, people get results. It's the degree to which the magnitude of the results and the speed at which they're coming, and are they aligned with the right outcomes, or the outcomes that you need for the business. You know, I think some of the gaps in leadership today are systemic in nature, in that businesses lack a process for building alignment from top to bottom and on the expected outcomes, the roadmap of how we're going to get those outcomes, the underlying action planning. And then the other side of it is the behavioral the true leadership side at the individual level of how are people able to engage their teams, and do they have the right skill sets both within themselves and their team to achieve those outcomes. And you know, it's been a topic of discussion since the very early part of my career, in that, you know, we historically picked the leader, the first line manager or supervisor, to be the best engineer, the best technician, the best machinist or whatever. And we still do a lot of that today in organizations, and we don't give people sufficient training and development and opportunities to develop the skills necessary to lead in those roles. Ken, what were some of your thoughts on some of these issues?
Well, I think I would agree with that. I think the biggest, to me, is part of the results of not addressing some of these issues and these changes are tied to the business results that are getting accomplished within the organizations. But I'm with Bill. I mean, for years and years and years, going all the way back to the start of my career, you know, we promote the people from internally. And unfortunately, most organizations do not spend enough time developing their people and understanding the right kinds of competencies and skills that are required to be successful as they move up to the next, the next level of the organization. And so, you know, we get to that, and then combined with that, most organizations, as I've seen, and I look back on my career, you tend to find and have mentors who are people that you can speak with, who can give you an outside perspective, are not necessarily, or could be, in your existing organization. But in most organizations, we don't see that kind of mentor relationship established or promoted, shall we say, within them to help grow the capabilities and skill sets of their new operational leaders.
Well, you know, and I think to add on that, Ken, one of the things that we hear that is popular a lot these days is the idea of coaching or a coaching mindset. But too often what I think we see is that there's not a formal process within the organization around how people are coached and how it's integral to operating the business, but it's something that's typically done when we see someone is not performing. Okay, so we need, you know, if someone's not not performing or not delivering. Okay, well, we need to put them on a performance improvement plan, and now we're going to coach them. So ultimately what we do is we wait till someone is struggling or failing before we say, okay, we're going to coach them. When if you think of other activities that we engage in outside of a business, we actually coach from the beginning, right? We start with the skill building and the development part immediately with coaching, that's integral to building skills and capabilities.
Right. So it's just more reactive than proactive, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So step back a second. So what are some of the skills that operational leaders need to develop to succeed that you mentioned that aren't being developed?
Well, I'll start with this one, and I think, to me, one of the biggest challenges I see with operational leaders, some do it very well, but not many, and that is clearly communicating the vision of where you're trying to take the organization. They tend to be very good at understanding certain KPIs and certain metrics, and or being able to help firefight and fix problems very quickly. And, we have the gap to the coaching piece of this, as Bill spoke about, but stepping back and setting the business context of where are we trying to go, and what does the long-term future look like for their organization, and helping people understand that, and then tying everything that they do and how they communicate that on a regular version or regular time frame as they go through their daily activities is, I think, one of the things that operational leaders tend to struggle with. We tend to be, in the past, you tend to be very tactical versus thinking about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Well, and I think the other side of that is, or to take one level deeper about the vision, I mean, you can have sometimes when we talk about vision, we think it's the company vision, right? The big overarching company vision, but the other aspects of that have to be for your group, for your team. What is the vision? What's the expectations around performance? What does good look like for our team? And getting everybody to understand that. And so I think leaders at all levels have to be capable of building consensus around the vision for their work group, their team, their area, of what does good really look like for us? What are we trying to get to from a performance standpoint, from how we interact? What's the way that we want to do business together every day? And I think if you can do that, that sets the foundation and a bit of the framework for how you now go about establishing at least the systemic side of running the business every day.
Do you guys have any thoughts on how to do that? I was reading a study recently where they'd actually studied the communication at various levels of the organization, and the business strategy was dramatically less understood as you went down to the supervisor level, where I think 16% said that they understood how these business strategy impacted their day-to-day work. Can you talk a little bit about how to actually get that communication and understanding of the business goals and strategy?
Go ahead. Ken, why don't you take the first crack at it?
Yeah, sure, gladly. Look, I think here's some of the challenges with this. Sometimes strategies, as Bill was saying, tend to be too high level. And so, what you have to be careful of is, one, not becoming too cliche, and, well, we're going to be customer-centric. Okay, well, what does that really mean?
Right.
Or, in the terms of operations, we want to be a low-cost provider. Okay, well, what does that mean? And so we have to come up with a way to very simply portray to people through a statement or two that's detailed enough that they understand what we're really trying to accomplish, and it paints the picture, right? You know, let's go to the Southwest Airlines example with bags fly free. It's very clear that's a strategy for them, right? And how they manage that, including all the visuals that they put on their aircraft, that they put on their baggage handling carts, that is all the way through prevalent through all of their advertising and interaction with their customer base. It's very clear what that part of their vision is, right? And so that simplicity, I think, is one of the keys because sometimes we try to make strategy and a vision way too complicated. And simplifying it that way is a way that you get it all the way down to every associate where they can start to understand that. It's not easy for different businesses to come up with that, but that's where time and effort spent thinking about that actually can have a very large impact on people's understanding.
That's a great example. Do you have anything to add, Bill?
Well, I think, you know, in addition to clarifying the strategy and simplifying it, then it rolls down to simplifying how you're going to measure and how you're going to manage. You know, the other thing that we run into that complicates things for leadership teams and muddies the water is too many KPIs. And I don't mean by a little bit. We have worked with organizations that they'll tell you they have 40 or 60 KPIs that they use to run the business. And what you find when you participate in their reviews is they review them all, but they don't really use them to run the business. They status them, they talk about some of the problems, but they don't really drive it to the right level of what's the action plan, what's the countermeasure, and what's the impact if we don't get this back on track, and what's it mean to the business if we do get it back on track. And so, and they're typically not cascaded far enough into the organization with enough clarity to be able to help you know if you're executing on that strategy, right? Or the action, or the overall, say, your annual operating plan to know that you're going to hit the numbers. So I think, you know, along with simplifying and clarifying the messages and the action plans, you've got to tie the KPI system to it so that you have real knowledge every day of, are we winning, are we making the plan?
So fewer KPIs and then cascade them deeper into the organization.
Yeah.
And is one of the issues related to some of the challenge, does it relate to how operations and supply chain managers are recognized and incentivized and promoted?
I would say that, look, most companies, we can always debate whether or not these types of resources are recognized and promoted and rewarded effectively. There's probably always room in most organizations to improve that. Where I think part of the challenge is that people in these roles aren't necessarily effective at being able to identify talent, being able to evaluate talent, and building talent within the organization. You know, we like to use the term that a good leader is a talent multiplier, right? So I'm not so sure it's around the recognition and the promotion as much as it is the challenge for most leaders is, and I look back on my career, and you don't really get good training on how do you evaluate the non-technical skill sets of your people and the capabilities of your people. We're usually very good at evaluating technical skill sets, but the non-technical skill sets that are required to be a successful leader in operations or in business doesn't really matter. There's not really good ways to teach people that. You know, and there's tools that can be used to, one, help identify that, but then we have to figure out how to tactically use that information into, you know, the business and managing the business.
Well, and I think the key element, one not the only one for sure, but a key element to what Ken's speaking to is developing good coaches, developing people that know how to coach. And that's not something that we all just inherently know how to do from, coming out of, our educational backgrounds, if whatever they might be, right? Mm-hmm. So, and this shouldn't be an HR-driven type program. Well, we're going to send you to 5 classes and then you'll know how to be a coach. What's missing in the organizations is that element of coaching and mentoring and working with people that is just a part of how you operate the business. And so that while you may go for some outside training to refine the skills that you're developing, the core teaching and learning should come through the doing and participating in the process every day. And you're getting coaching from people that are on your peer or management team above you, and it's giving you insight into how should I approach this with my team and my peers. Right? And so I think there's a big element to that. And too often what organizations do is they fall back to, well, HR has this whole development process we're going to send you through. And those don't necessarily get the results that you want.
So Bill, what you're describing, it's a very kind of a deep cultural emphasis. What are your thoughts on kind of closing that gap, and where does an organization start? Talking about maybe leadership models.
Well, I think, there's lots of good leadership models out there. There's obviously the Danaher model. There's GE. Several companies have developed their own sense of culture, and we've seen this in some client cultures where, one of the best ones is a client, an automotive tier 2 company we work with up in Canada. But it really starts at the top, and it starts with the most senior leadership team of how they set the model, how they engage. And they've established both the systemic framework of how they cascade KPIs and manage it, but then how they interact and the culture. Really, truly have spent time thinking about defining the business culture and the operating environment of how they interact, how they make decisions, and how that drives down through the organization. And it creates a culture that is very performance-driven, very results-driven, but it's at the same time collaborative. So where when people need help, they can reach out and get help from their peers or their managers. And when they're struggling to get the results, the process is there to help them pull on those resources or to get them help so that they can move forward, as opposed to, in some cultures, if you're struggling, it's what I talked about before. You're not getting it done. It's time for a performance improvement plan for you, as opposed to how do we, and those are very different mindsets, right? One is, how do I put all the process and the resources in place to help people succeed? How do I set them up for success, as opposed to, here's how we work, and if you aren't making it, then I'm going to put you on a performance plan, right? So
it's a very different approach, obviously, a very different mindset.
Sure.
Yeah. Ken, do you have anything to add?
I think, it gets to the culture piece and how you operate, right? And how you operate is what you live on a daily basis. It's a little cliche again that, lead as you want, doing what you want them to do. So lead by example, right? Mm-hmm. And that tone is set from the very top, as Bill was saying, down through the organization. On every interaction that you have up and down the organization, it has to be based on the kind of culture that you want within your organization. We look at, and I come from the mindset of every one of those interactions is a learning opportunity or a teaching moment. And we have to step back and take advantage of that versus being so focused on the outcome versus what is the process and what is the mindset and the systems thinking that is required to achieve the outcome, and helping our people understand that. And that's how you start to teach, and we talk about the coaching mindset. That's how you start to get people to where you need them to be from a skills perspective as you build this over time.
Yeah, and I think time is the real key point, because strong cultures and strong performance-driven cultures with inherently strong coaching roles don't just happen overnight. It takes a long time to build those up, because it has to start at the top. They have to set the cadence. They have to set the examples, clarify the expectations, and then it takes time to build the capability in the organization, because you have to recognize you're not going to start out with a tremendous amount of the capability for driving the culture like you want from day one. So you have to give yourself time. So there's a little bit of being patient, but not too accepting, if that makes sense. You have to be always pushing for performance and to drive it, but you have to be accepting of the fact that it takes a little bit of time, and we're building, but you're constantly focusing on that building process. And I think about the one company we've had some experience with. It's taken them, I would say, probably a good 3-4 years to really get to where they're at, to where now the culture is somewhat self-perpetuating. So that as leaders, because the other thing that organizations run into is leaders change, right? People come and go from roles, people come and go from the organization, and every time that you have those events, it causes a little bit of a ripple. And, you know, in larger organizations, you have constant ripples because people are always moving. And so sometimes it takes longer. That drives that tail longer to get the culture where you want it. But you know, in a smaller one, obviously it's quicker. But you have to account for those ripples and understand that that's going to change it.
So maybe going back to Ken. So how do you balance the teaching moment and the need to solve the problem and focus on the business outcomes?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things. I go back to one of my early mentors who said very clearly to me, Ken, do not come to me with a problem. Come to me with a potential solution, right? And it was to set the tone of don't wait for me to come and ask you the question and to help you solve the problem, right? So part of it starts with just setting that expectation as a leader with people, number one. Number two is you have to step back and think about what have we given our associates, our people, the right processes, the right skill sets, and the right tools to be successful. And sometimes as leaders, we fail to step back and look at, have we as leaders provided everything we've needed to help those people develop and grow? So, you know, if it's an urgent customer issue, sometimes you're going to have to make that hard decision, that problem solving and fixing, for example, a major quality issue that could be shutting your plant down or your customer's facilities down. You're going to have to balance these things, but you know, you have to have the mindset of I'm going to err towards the learning side and the teaching side because it's way too easy for us to just say, here's what you need to do and fix the problem. To me, leaders have a choice. You can either be a dictator or you can be a servant leader / coach. And we are the ones who make that call. We make that decision ourselves as to which one of those we want to be. Good leaders know when to move across that spectrum based on the situation and or the individual and how much time and effort has been invested into that person.
Well, and you can have cases where you have to do both, right? Where you have to have, depending on the urgency of the issue and the severity, you may have to be very focused and very directive, if you will, in terms of actions and driving some short-term actions to correct the issue. But that doesn't preclude you from either simultaneously or immediately after having coaching discussions or after action, you know, let's do a post-mortem on this. How did we get here? What could we have done differently? Right, and help people understand and think it through. Once you've maybe stepped past the immediate issue, the crisis, if you will, it's okay. We solved that. We put the fire out. Now, but But too often times, organizations get hung up in just putting out the fire. And the real positive is if you can stop after the fact and say, all right, how did we get here? What drove this? And how do we not do this again? And the organizations that do that really well tend to be the better performing ones and tend to get the better results.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So what are some of the tools that operational leaders might be neglecting? Ken, you talked about, asking if we're giving people the tools and the skills they need to succeed. Is there like some common ones that are overlooked? Because when people can kind of reel off the list of lean tools.
Well, yeah, I think that's a little bit of a loaded question, but to me, this isn't so much. When we talk about the tools, it varies by what you're dealing with within the organization. For example, if I'm in a manufacturing environment, the tools tend to be more physical types of things: jigs, fixtures, wrenches, screwdrivers, right? Things of that nature for them to be successful. Is that stuff located closest to where it's being used? Is it available to them on a regular basis? Is it good, right, versus defective? Things of that nature. As you go to and start to deal with, supervisors, it's now getting to more about what is the tools I'm using to provide them different types of information that can help them understand the performance of their portion of the business and how they're going to go forward and manage that, right, which then ties into the skill sets. But, getting to, do they have the right kind of metrics in place? Is it measuring the right things? And getting to, we call it the management system, which is the right KPIs in the right areas at the right level that measure meaningfully what's really going on in the business and or that specific area. So, the tools, as you go higher up in the organization, become a little bit blurry from the standpoint of it's really more around some of the processes and the skills, and the tools is really more information, how information is provided to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of the things that we've talked about recently with organizations is it's how do you build the capability to solve problems in the business, top to bottom. And in order to do that, you've got to adopt a common set of language and methodologies. And it's not really, if I use an A3 methodology or an 8D, which is better. That's the wrong discussion. The discussion is pick how you want to build the capability in the organization. And with that, you'll define roles, you'll define decision-making processes, you'll define how people work together, how things get done, and then drive that deeply across the organization. Get everybody on the same page so that if you like use Ken's example of where, if you go to your boss, you don't come with hey boss, I've got a problem. You come with a set of behaviors. We've identified an issue, here's what we're doing about it, we're going, and you start to talk about it in the common way that everyone in the organization would understand. If you think, to me, one of the things, if you think back that Jack Welch did at GE with Six Sigma, was less about Six Sigma itself and more about what they established early on was this is the way we solve problems. This is the way things get done here. And regardless of how effective anyone thinks it might have been, the cultural aspect is what was powerful because it defined very clearly how they run the business. I think the same is true in the Danaher model and in others, that they're very clear on what the process looks like to drive the business. The underlying tools and methods they use, they line up on those, but it's a common understanding of how they run the business and they address issues and problems.
And you're talking not just within the facility, you're talking like across multiple.
Everywhere in the business. This is regardless of the business type, whether it's a manufacturing, distribution, a service-oriented business, It's more about the entire enterprise of how do you address issues and problems. What's the common way in which we do it? So because frequently, as problems grow in scope, issues, they become cross-functional. And if you don't build the capability across the enterprise, understand how to address them, how to interact, how do we solve these things, what's the culturally way we do that, and that we speak to each other and that we know how it works. If you don't establish that, you're not as effective, right?
Mm-hmm. So we seem to be coming back to leadership consistency and discipline and that type of topics. Is it, I don't know how to say it's that simple, but I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that and what that means, maybe in contrast to what doesn't work.
Well, I think in some aspects, David, it is that simple.
Okay.
It's simple to say it, right? And we can talk about it. It's a great deal of hard work to implement it, but consistency of approach, consistency of application is huge in terms of making sure that you're getting the not only the outcomes, but you're getting at them, you're getting the results and the outcomes in the way that you want to deliver on those, right? There's lots of ways that you can get the results, but what you also want to get the organization to understand is how do we get those results? What's the way in which we execute to get those results? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of how we run the business every day? Mm-hmm. And that has to involve a lot of the things we've talked about, but it just is the relentless focus on that consistency of day over day over day of, the right behaviors, building the right skills and capabilities in the organization, and building organizational capability and capacity for working with problems and issues every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other piece to add to that is helping leaders become better at assessing the talent and the capabilities of the people that work for them, right? So that they can now become and develop plans to improve those skill sets and to elevate the capabilities of those who work for them. So it's the consistency, it's the discipline, but it's also they have to have good capabilities to assess the talent that they have.
And so the assessments, it's beyond kind of the annual performance assessments. You're talking about something like the career path leadership development, where you're getting experiences in different areas. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, look, I think most performance reviews, performance management systems in many organizations simply focus on how well did you do against achieving your goals.
Right.
Right? And quite frankly, that's one piece of it. But the other piece of this is, how are you developing as an individual your leadership skill sets? If you're, weak in communications and need to improve your communication skills, improve your problem-solving skills, improve your other managerial types of skills to be more successful and to elevate the performance of your team, is an area that I think needs to be focused on, because it's way too simple to say, hey, you didn't meet your goals. Well, again, as I think we've talked through this last 30 minutes, a lot of why goals are not achieved is because we've not always given clear direction. We haven't necessarily given our people the right processes, skills, and tools to be successful. And so we have to step back as leaders and think about, okay, for this individual, what skills do I need to enhance to move them along within the organization to elevate their performance and to elevate the overall group's performance or the business's performance. And I think that's an area where operational leadership, we lose our focus there sometimes.
Okay. Bill, anything to add on that?
No.
So so we've talked for almost 40 minutes now. Any final closing thoughts or comments on what we've talked about, and I guess even the coaching topic?
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, look, I think it's, as leaders, we have to just step back and think about the context in which we are trying to lead the organization. It's about building the capabilities of the people within the organization, and as we've talked about, getting around common approaches and how we interact, how we problem solve as an organization, and how we evaluate and develop our talent is I think, the key. And you know, the coaching mindset as a leader is every opportunity that we get is that opportunity to teach people and to help improve their skills and capabilities and to elevate the performance of our businesses. You know, as we go around and interact with clients, one of the biggest challenges they experience is sustainment of improvement activities. And quite frankly, from my perspective, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can put all the KPIs into place, but if we don't have the right leadership mindset and the right processes and tools and capabilities in place, you're not going to sustain the benefit. And so I've seen many organizations that do very well at putting the KPIs out there to the lowest level and cascading them down and having clear expectations. But the management team does not do a very good job of coaching their people on how to solve problems, of how to get better, how to interact with their people. And that is what impacts sustainment and performance of the business.
I think that's a good point, Ken. I think, you know, we do, as an organization, a lot of times spend more time focusing on getting the problem solved and resolving it to fix the immediate issue. But we don't spend as much investing in helping the team understand how to do that. How can we do it better? Not only on the issue, but just as a process. How do we solve these things? How do we interact? What can we do differently? And giving feedback to people where they need it. And not in the context of, you know, they're underperforming, but in the context of helping them raise their performance. So more of a positive outlook and proactive as opposed to reactive. Right? I mean, I think too often we do wait for something to go wrong and then we give feedback, as opposed to seeing things that are right and talking about how to continue to refine what they're doing. And again, if you think about outside activities, you don't just coach when it's underperforming or not getting the desired outcome. You build on good performance, and I think that too often the organizations don't have the mindset of we should be coaching all the time, regardless of if the performance is good or not. We should always be coaching and trying to build capability in the organization.
All right, very good. Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Ken, and thanks to everyone else for joining us today. This recording will be posted on the TBM website, and we're also going to publish a summary on the TBM blog at tbmcg.com. And please let us know. You can reach out to Bill or Ken or any of us, and let us know what topics you'd like us to talk about in the future, what challenges you're having that we could help address. That's it, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.